Text, here, Human Health Exposure Analysis Resource. Here Spotlight Series, interviews with here investigators. Dr. Andres Cardenas.
In our Investigator Spotlight series, you will hear about investigator projects, how HERE experts contributed to the project's success, and how their project contributes to HERE's goal of expanding our understanding of environmental exposures and human health. Today, Dr. Andres Cardenas, assistant professor at Stanford University in the Department of Epidemiology and Population Health, discusses his project, Mitochondrial DNA Biomarkers of Prenatal Metal Mixture Exposure, Intergenerational Inheritance and Infant Growth.
So the focus of my project was really to try to understand whether prenatal exposures, so exposures happening early during fetal development, affect children's development, both growth and adiposity in general.
Slide, Parent Study, and Population. Project VIVA. A longitudinal perspective pre-birth cohort specifically designed to examine the extent to which events during early development, including environmental exposures, affect health outcomes over a lifetime. 2,128 pregnant women were recruited at their initial prenatal visit in eastern Massachusetts. April 1999 through November 2002.
We had the hypothesis that prenatal metals, things that we have known to be both neurotoxic and toxic in general, like lead exposure or mercury exposure, would potentially interact with each other to kind of exacerbate these issues during child development. But there were many questions, and there's still many questions about other metals, both essential and non-essential, that we encounter throughout our diets and also from environmental sources too.
Slide, see here/here study and population. Exposure of interest, prenatal metal mixture, moms and infants from Project VIVA. Health outcomes of interest, 1. Markers of mitochondrial, MT, DNA damage in mothers and subsequent mtDNA damage in offspring. 2. Fetal growth and rapid postnatal infant weight gain and whether this association is mediated by maternal and cord blood biomarkers of mtDNA damage.
So that was the focus of it. We wanted to understand which genomic biomarkers might be affected as well. And these biomarkers implicated mitochondria specifically, as is passed on from the maternal side. So we decided to study mitochondrial biomarkers, as well as a marker of aging, which is telomere length on both expecting mothers and then also their children after delivery.
Text, a question.
How did consultations with HERE experts contribute to your project?
So the consultations with the HERE labs actually contributed immensely to my project. Initially, we wanted to measure a biomarker of an epigenetic modification in the mitochondria. We wanted to measure methylation of the mitochondria after, in addition to mitochondrial copy number, which is abundance of mitochondria in a sample. After the initial consultation, we realized that the measurement of at least methylation of mitochondria was a little bit challenging and then debated at that point in time. So we decided to go in a different route to complement the measurement of mitochondria with telomere length. In terms of the exposures, that was the biomarker of the outcome. In terms of the exposures, initially, we wanted to measure toxic metals. We didn't know it was a possibility to also measure essential metals, which are metals that we need as cofactors in our bodies. And this kind of expanded the scope of the project into looking not only at toxic elements, but also essential elements which are needed for normal development. So that kind of put a really interesting spin into the project, which not only are we were able to study non-essential toxic exposures, but also essential elements, which often co-occur with some of these other non-essential metals as well. And they can come from diet or environmental sources too. The data center also provided good expertise in terms of the environmental measurements and providing some quality control and quality assurance on those measures. We performed the statistical analysis ourselves. They provided a lot of support into making sure that the data was well documented, that we had pretty good descriptors for the data, that we're able to archive that long-term as well. And they also perform essential quality control and quality assurance on the data, advising also on the inclusion of multiple duplicates. So these are technical duplicates, basically the same sample measured multiple times, to be able to quantify the precision and how reliable these environmental measures were. So this is something that of course, was in our radar, but they provided the expertise to be able to do it in a way that was systematic and that we were confident, at least we're able to evaluate the quality of the data that we were receiving. So the data center was instrumental in providing guidance in terms of data quality, data assurance, and reliability as well.
Text, a question.
How will your HERE project advance our understanding of the influence of the environment on human health over a lifetime? And have you been able to publish your results?
Our HERE project resulted in multiple publications so far, and we have continued to use this data beyond what the initial intent was or the initial proposed project. So we did publish our results on prenatal metal mixtures and biomarkers of mitochondrial, like mitochondrial copy number and telomere length across the two generations on the moms and the children. And we found evidence for both toxic effects of non-essential metals, for example, lead, and also the effect of essential metals, like, for example, zinc and selenium on these biomarkers, which kind of highlights the interplay between the two classes of chemicals, essential and non-essential, of course. Also, I think one of the findings that is really interesting that came out of the project, initially we were focused on infant growth, things like birth weight, which we found some evidence that the non-essential metal mixture interacted to lower birth weight as hypothesized. But we also found instances where some of the essential metals like zinc could potentially interact with other elements like lead to modify that association. One of the most interesting findings and one of the recent publications that we have is looking at prenatal metals, both essentials and non-essentials, with child adiposity and growth. And this is, when children were in their teens already. So it's really interesting that we see this sustained effect that the prenatal metal exposure, both essential, contributes to higher childhood adiposity, while the essential metal actually contributes to lower childhood adiposity. So they're kind of acting in opposite directions many years after the exposures, of course, because there was a prenatal maternal exposure. So I think this is one of the most interesting findings that we have had so far.
Text, a question.
Would you recommend HERE to other investigators?
I would highly recommend HERE to others. The main reason is that I applied to this as an early stage investigator. I was a postdoc at the time, and my postdoctoral mentor encouraged me to do so. And I think it's a great way to get some experience on elaborating on your idea and your own hypothesis as well. I know the NIH system is very competitive to try to go for a bigger award. It also produced a lot of preliminary data that actually resulted in a grant for me. So this was very beneficial. As we had a lot of exposure data, we explored different venues that allow us to generate preliminary data that later resulted into a larger R1 grant. So it really benefited my career immensely, but it also allowed me to kind of propose my own project and ideas independent of some of the mentoring team that I had.
To hear more about the other investigators, check out our interviews with individual investigators in this Spotlight series. Thank you for watching.